Have you ever said there ought to be a law? I'm guessing that you were thinking that someone was doing something that ought to be prevented, that someone should be stopped from doing something that's wrong. But what if there were laws that said you had to do something good? Well, there ought to be a law. And maybe they exist. Maybe we've been just ignoring them. Maybe we've been treating them as suggestions or aspirations, nothing that might really happen. But maybe it really can. Take some time with us today, would you? Sit with us, digest these thoughts a little bit, and save some room for dessert. Come back at the end and we'll see what we've learned and maybe offer up a tasty treat. Let's examine what it means to follow God's law, which will lead us on a path on the marginal way. During this worship series, we are exploring how our everyday activities can become spiritual practices that bring more light and meaning to our lives and provide sustenance to those around us. The server at your favorite restaurant might regularly say to you, "Leave room for dessert." In other words, don't eat to excess. Leave some room. This is a good spiritual practice, says the author of Leviticus. Gleaning is the practice of gathering food for those who need it out of the abundance of what is available. What awareness can we bring to the food we buy, cook, and throw away as part of our spiritual mandate to care for the human family? Whether it is cooking more than enough and sharing with someone who needs it, buying extra at the grocery store to donate to the food bank, or getting involved in a Gleaning Network's efforts, our everyday use of foods is our spiritual practice this week.
Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto unto my feet and a light unto my path. When I feel afraid and I think I've lost my way, still you're there right beside me. Nothing will I fear as long as you are near. Please be near me to the end. Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path.
Nourishing God, we give you thanks for the physical and spiritual food that sustains us. Open our eyes to the light of possibilities, even when the day ahead holds difficulties. Be with us, near us, beside us. Amen.
Thy word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path.
is breaking from your word. More light, more truth. Holy Spirit, help us hear what needs to be heard.
Well, hello again. It is so good to see you. You always make me feel good. You know what else feels good? Something that makes us all happy, I'll bet. It comes at the end of the meal. Dessert. Doesn't dessert make the meal sometimes? It's just the best part. And to get there, what do you have to do? Save room. It's important not to take too much. Same goes for dessert, doesn't it? So we're going to talk about that today, but we can't do it in the dark. We need more light. So join me in turning on our time with children light, would you? Are you ready? Ta-da! And now you, at home, are you ready? In 3, 2, 1, ta-da! More light. So today, we are going shopping. And I have 2 bags. My first bag says mine. And we know what that means, don't we? The things we put in here belong to me. Your bag belongs to you. But I have another bag. And it says glean. Glean. Do you know that word? You ever heard that word before? What does that mean? Well, I have another word that you may not have heard before. It's a book of the Bible called Leviticus. I know, crazy words, huh? Leviticus. But here's what the Bible has to say in Leviticus chapter 19. When you reap the harvest of your land, that means when you take in the crop at the end of the year, when you pick the fruit and the vegetables out of your garden, when you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap to the very edges of your field. You don't take it all. You leave a little bit. Or gather the gleanings of your harvest. There's the word. You don't gather the gleanings. Let's find out what that means. You shall not strip your vineyard bare, or gather the fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and the alien. I am Yahweh, your God. You're supposed to leave some things in your garden, in a vineyard that grows grapes, but you might be growing something else or nothing at all. We'll get to that. You need to leave some for other people, for those who are poor, those who are hungry, those who are foreigners who are new to your land. That's the word alien in that passage. People who have come here and haven't quite figured out how to make a living here yet. You're supposed to help them by leaving some of what you have. Well, isn't that a wonderful thing to do? To not take it all for yourself, to leave a little room for dessert, to leave a little room to glean, for other people to glean, to take care of their needs. Now, this week's practice will be to do some gleaning, to take something that you have that you don't need because you got too much of it. It might be food. It might be toys. It might be clothing. It could be any number of things. Talk to the adults in your life about what you might be able to share with others and where you can share it, because there are lots of opportunities. There are plenty of ways for us to be gleaners, to only take what we need and leave enough for others as well. Because we all know that if you take the whole plate of cookies, then I don't get dessert, do I? And neither does anybody else. These things are given to us to share. And so that's what we're going to look at this week. Let's try that, okay? Let's end our time together with our Repeat After Me poem. There is a lamp inside of me. It's always there for all to see. But there are times the light feels dim and things are tough and just too grim. But that's okay. When I feel down, I know in time it turns around. I'm not alone when I am sad. I'm always loved. For that, I'm glad. And I'm glad we had this time together. And I'm glad that I'll see you again next time. Bye-bye.
More light, more truth is breaking from your word. More light, more truth. Holy Spirit, help us hear what needs to be heard. Help us hear what needs to be heard. Help us hear what needs to be heard.
Yahweh spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to all the congregations of the Israelites and say to them, You shall be holy, for I, Yahweh, your God, am holy. When you reap the harvest of your land, you shall not reap the very edges of your fields, or gather the gleanings of your harvest. You shall strip your vineyard bare, or gather fallen grapes of your vineyard. You shall leave them for the poor and alien. I, Yahweh, your God. You shall not steal. You shall not deal falsely. You shall not lie to one another. And you shall not swear falsely by the name, profaning the name of your God. I am Yahweh. You shall not render an unjust argument. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great. With justice you shall judge your neighbor. You shall not go around as a slanderer among your people, and you shall not stand idly by when the blood of your neighbor is at stake. I am Yahweh. You shall not hate in your heart anyone of your kind. You shall reprove your neighbor, and you shall incur guilt yourself. You shall not take vengeance or bear grudge against any of your people, but you shall love your neighbor as yourself. I am the sovereign one.
I considered looking up the statistics about hunger and particularly about food waste and those sorts of things. And then I realized I don't think I need to convince anyone. I think we know that there is a problem with food security in our country, in our neighborhoods, in our own communities. We have a problem. We know because we try to do something about it. And we know that part of the problem is our own waste. We see it all around us, and I hope we don't see much of it in our homes, but I'm sure that we do. A lot of food goes to waste. There is plenty of food to feed everyone in this country if we didn't throw away most of what we throw away. So we could do better. We should do better. How much difference can you make? How many practices can you change to try to break that system? You can shop locally. You can try to eat more leftovers and waste less. You can compost the stuff that you do have to throw out so that you're not at least getting into the food chain or into the waste stream. All of those things do matter. But is it going to really change the big picture? And this is where there's an argument for law, right? You got to make people do the right thing.
Now, most laws are created to stop us from doing the wrong things, right? That's what most laws are enforced as. You were going too fast. You didn't stop at the stop sign, you know? It's about don't do the negative thing. It's really hard to create a law to make people do the right thing. Right? We don't have a lot of laws like that. So it's interesting that the law in the book of Leviticus that we read this morning is about do the right thing. That's the law. So think about that difference. In our culture, in our society, the way we do the right thing, the way we serve the common good is usually through taxes, right? The money comes from each of us to do something good for everyone because charity just doesn't seem to cut it, does it? That's the sad part. And I know that there are Christians around us who will argue that it's the church's job to take care of those who are poor and to feed those who are hungry and to clothe those who are naked. We're given those mandates by Christ, so we should do that out of our own charity. And my answer to that is, and how's that going? Right? Jonathan Edwards, the great Calvinist who preached a little bit south of here in Massachusetts, who believed that you were no better than a spider dangling on a web being held over a fire, and that's how God thought of you, right? A real high esteem for humanity, right? This Calvinist view of total depravity, that humans are basically worms incapable of doing anything good apart from God. That's the theology, and that's the theology of many, many Christians in America today, right? They would say, well, the Bible tells us to do it, we should do it. And my question, how's it working? Well, Jonathan Edwards' answer to that was, people have to be taxed. You have to take their money because they're not going to do it willingly. Jonathan Edwards supported that. And so if such a strict Calvinist says people are so bad that they have to be forced into doing good, then maybe we should at least start there. Maybe there ought to be laws to force us into doing good. And those of us who would do it willingly, then don't have to complain. Those are the easiest laws to obey, right? It's easy to obey the law to be nice if you're already nice. Well, the ancient Hebrew laws required care of neighbor. And we don't know particularly how well that was observed, but it was the social safety net of the time. It was how people cared for each other. It was mandated in their scriptures. And we know, at least from the book of Ruth, that it worked for her. Right? We know that she was able to glean in the fields of Boaz and care for her family, and ended up marrying Boaz and getting the benefits, reaping all the benefits of care of the community. And it was from her line that Jesus eventually was born. So good can come out of these kind of laws. And Jesus himself preached about this. His very first sermon was about the law of Jubilee, about releasing the captives. Right? That was built into the rules in ancient Israel, that you could own property, but every so often it had to be returned to its original owners. And that was to make sure that if you had a bad harvest and you had to sell your labor to someone else because you became an indentured servant, and maybe you had to sell off your land and all those sorts of things because it wasn't working well for you, that wouldn't last generationally, that it wouldn't pass on from generation to generation, that there wouldn't be just a few who had all the power because they had all the money. That's what was going on in Egypt. That's how the Hebrew people became enslaved, was the famine came to the land and they went to where there was a storehouse of goods. Ironically, the Pharaoh there had listened to Joseph in order to do that. So God has a sense of irony here, right? And God says, you shall not be like that. In your society, you take care of one another and you level the playing field every so often. Every 7 years, you let the land rest. And every 7 sevens, 49, that extra year, that Sabbath of Sabbath, the 50th year, the Jubilee year, you make everything right. You release everyone from their debts and you give everyone back their land and you start fresh. Now, there's not great evidence that ever happened, but that was the law. And that was what Jesus preached on when he had the scroll of Isaiah and said, the day of God has come. He said, it's come, this day when the poor are lifted up, when the blind are given their sight, when the captives are set free. And of course, the congregation was thrilled and tried to throw him off the cliff. But he preached Jubilee the same way his mother sang about it. In the Magnificat, Mary sings about the mighty being brought down and the lowly being lifted up in the past tense. She believes God's already done it. And Jesus preached, this kingdom of heaven, this reign of God is at hand. It is here. If you have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, if you have the heart to understand it, it's here already. It doesn't feel that way to us, does it? It doesn't feel like we can assume the kingdom of God. It still feels like an aspiration, something we aspire to and hope for and pray for and maybe give our effort to, but it's not here. But we'd be wrong because Jesus said it was. We might think of it as all spiritualized, as personal spiritual growth, that this is how we should grow as individuals. And there is certainly a real element of that. But it is also real and tangible and should be the law. Yes, I said the law. And I know that we say we're free from the law. You turn to the epistles in the New Testament, and Paul talks about being free from the law, but he does have a role for it. You realize that the Apostle Paul talked about the law as a teacher. Yeah, sure, maybe it's a crutch until we get there, but we need it. It teaches us how we ought to live. You see, personal growth and the law don't have to be exact opposites. Now, we are part of a denomination whose rules and laws are polity, as we call it, are covenantal. And covenant only works when the partners agree to it. It's the difference between a contract and a covenant. That's the difference in a marriage, right? You can get married at the courthouse, but you go to the church because you want to have a covenant. You're saying it's not just an equal exchange. I'm not just going to say, I give and I get something in return, and if you don't give me in return, you've broken the contract and therefore it's over. If that was the extent of marriages, there wouldn't be any left, right? Because you have to say, I will make up the difference. I'm committed to this. I see something greater in this. That's what covenant is about. Now, when I was starting out in ministry and being subject to the polity of our denomination, I was instructed, ordered, directed, commanded. I don't know what the real word was. I was told I had to go to all the meetings by my supervisor. I can't say that I was happy going to all the meetings, going to every installation and ordination and ecclesiastical council and every annual meeting and every gathering, but I was expected to go, and it was sort of part of my job. So my beginning entrance into the law was out of fear of consequence, right? I will do it because I have to. Sometimes that's where we get, and that's where we start. And there's nothing wrong in particular with that, unless that's where we stay, right? Because you stay there, then you're going to want to eventually overthrow the rules. You want to break everything, because who wants to live in that kind of fear and obedience? But I took it to the next level. There was a point at which, as I was in my own discernment process and I was going to get ordained, that I realized I needed the people who were going to this meeting to show up at the meetings. And so if I had a relationship with them, I could say, hey, you'll come to my ecclesiastical council, right? Because you know me. I would have FaceTime. I still think it's good advice. I tell students this all the time. Show up at everything. So people know you. It's good. But that's just a quid pro quo. That's not covenant either. That's working out of a selfishness, perhaps an enlightened selfishness, but it's still selfishness. You're doing it for you. Still, you're doing it. At least you're finding motivation. But there came a point in my practice where I just assumed I was going to everything. I assumed I was going to show up. I assumed I was going to participate. I assumed I was going to volunteer, because it became something internalized. It moved from the outside of the law to the inside of my own spiritual practice, my own assumptions about who I was. It changed me from the outside in. And then it was easy enough to continue practicing that way, because my aspirations became my assumptions. And we can all do that. We can move from aspirations to assumptions. I wonder often when people give something up for Lent and they practice a Lenten fast, why do you go back to it at Easter? Now, I get it if you're denying yourself something, right? Some pleasure, that's okay. So maybe you give up chocolate or something. And the practice of denying yourself teaches you that you shouldn't take for granted that gift. Okay, that's one thing. But what if the practice is something constructive? And I've encouraged people to do this during Lent many times in my ministry. And maybe you'll consider it this Lent, which starts, warning, spoiler alert, in like 2 weeks. So be thinking about what you might want to do. I, for instance, one Lent decided that I was going to limit how many trips I took in my car. And I started walking from my house to the church as much as I could. It was 1.5 miles up, but uphill both ways. No, it was only uphill one way, but felt like uphill both ways some days, especially Lent being, think about the weather when you're doing this in Lent. And I would have people stop on the road and say, hey, can I give you a lift? Like, nope, doing my Lenten practice. I got to do this, And I realized I enjoyed doing that. And I realized that Easter should not be a reason to stop doing it. It should be, I've become accustomed to doing this thing. I should keep doing it. That I can actually make a difference by doing these things. So I think that fasting can lead to, a streak. Maybe you just put your pride into it, right? I'm not going to stop. 40 days isn't enough. I'll keep going. Maybe I can get to 50. Maybe I can get to 100. Maybe I can do it all year, right? At least there's that movement. And after a while, it just becomes a habit. And it just becomes normal. And it normalizes the practice. Your aspiration of caring for others and perhaps caring for the whole of creation can become an expectation with the practice. It can eventually become the assumption of how you live your daily life. You see how that can happen? Set your mind to it, make it your practice, and ultimately, the law becomes a part of you. And you just assume that this is how it is because this is who you are. Truly, if you change yourself, if you begin there, if you can find that change in you that matters, that is how you will change the world. Because you'll change your world, and the ripples will mean eventually the world gets changed. And that's not your job. Your job is to work on you. So start by saving room for dessert. Make a little space. And then maybe give up the dessert, right? Decide you don't need it. And now you've created that space. And in that space, whatever it is that you've saved, start giving it away. Start making a difference. As you see the good that you are responsible for in the world as something that you are capable of doing, you will find satisfaction. A satisfaction that beats the blues and the blahs that too easily settle in. And you will find a peace. You will achieve a peace that will last longer than any season. Amen.
Thank you for spending this time with us. It's really wonderful to have this time together, and I hope that you've appreciated it enough to share it, to like this video, pass it along to people you think might appreciate it. Subscribe to our channel, watch the other videos. All of these things are very helpful. And if you really appreciate the work that is done by our congregation, we would love a financial contribution to help. You can visit our website and there find ways to make electronic donations. And so our tasty treat for today is to be conscious of those things that matter in our lives, particularly starting with the food that we take in. Food insecurity is a real problem everywhere. And frankly, my friends, there is enough resource in the world for all the people of the world. It's really a matter of saving a little room for dessert and then giving that extra away instead of taking it on ourselves. See what you might do this week. Make a donation to a food program, spend some time, give away something that you don't need. All of those are practices that will not just serve the other, but will do something wonderful for you. So until we see each other again, many, many blessings.
La 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 la. You've been so kind and generous. I don't know how you keep on giving. For your kindness, I'm in debt to you. And for your selflessness, my admiration. For everything you've done, you know I'm bound to thank you for it. La 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 la. La 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 la. You've been so kind and generous. I don't know how you keep on giving. For your kindness, I'm in debt to you. And I never would have come this far without you. For everything you've done, you know I'm bound to thank you for it. La 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 la. La 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 la. Oh, I wanna thank you for so many gifts you gave, the love, the tenderness. I wanna thank you. I wanna thank you for your generosity, the love, the honesty that you gave me. I wanna thank you, show my gratitude, my love, my respect for you. I wanna thank you. Oh, I want to thank you, 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 thank you.